To access the individual items of a tuple, we use the same syntax we used for accessing individual characters in a string. As far as Python is concerned, strings, tuples, and lists are all effectively the same. They're all lists of some values. So to access an individual item, we just place an index inside brackets after the variable name. So this says to access the first element of my tuple. Remember, Python is 0 indexed, and so the first item actually has an index of 0. I keep repeating that because I know that's pretty weird, so hopefully if I keep repeating it, it will sink in. So here we create the exact same tuple we created before. It has 3 different values, a string, a float, and an integer. And on line 10, we say to print the value with index 0. And sure enough, it does. On lines 12 and 14, we do the same kind of thing with the float and the integer. We ask for the elements with the indices 1 and 2, and it gives them to us. And just like accessing individual items works the same way as with strings, so does accessing slices. So we can still use the same brackets, a colon in the middle. We specify our start point and our end point, and that specifies which values of the tuple we want to grab. So here we create a more complicated tuple with 5 values instead of 3. And on line 11, we first ask for the values from 3 to the end. We don't specify an endpoint, so it assumes the end of the list. There were 5 items in our list, so it grabs just the last 2. Line 13 grabs the items until the item with the index of 2, and so it grabs the first 2 items. Line 15 goes from index 1 until index 3, but doesn't include index 3, and so it prints the second and third value, 5.1 and 5. Line 17 starts with a negative index, and so it starts 3 back from the end of the list. 3 back gives us the last 3 items in the list, 5, q, and negative 1. And finally, line 19 ends 3 back from the end of the list. So it excludes the last 3 items in the list, which means it only grabs the first 2, hello world and 5.1. So the point of this is that we can access slices of tuples the same way we access slices of strings. Tuples, however, also have a fancy little syntax for unpacking them. When we say unpacking, we mean taking the list of values contained within the tuple and assigning each one to a distinct variable. Here's what that looks like. On lines 1 through 8, we create our tuple as we did before. Again, Python knows that because this tuple hasn't ended at the end of the line, it should automatically append the next line to the end of the current line. But then on line 12, we see our unpacking syntax. Now this is kind of interesting. What we do is we specify a number of variables inside parentheses and set them equal to the tuple. What this does is it one by one assigns the values of the tuple to the different variables contained on the right side of this assignment statement. The tuple is ordered, so it assigns the first value to the first variable given, the second value to the second variable given, and so on. And so after running this assignment statement, these variables have the values of the corresponding elements of the tuple. So when we print them on lines 15 through 20, we see their values match the original values of our variables. So this is a fancy kind of way of unpacking the individual parts of a tuple into variables with more usable names. It technically doesn't allow us to do anything we couldn't do before, because we could have easily referred to these parts as my tuple sub 1, my tuple sub 2, and so on. But it allows us to easily give the parts of a tuple self-documenting names rather than having to remember what type of data is at which index. Using this, we don't have to remember that my float is at index 1, because we're unpacking it into a variable that has a name, myFloat.